Stanton and the Miami Marlins travel to New York to face the Mets.
Left right field towards the corner.
The pregame's at 3:30 Eastern, followed by first pitch at 4:30. Saturday on ESPN Radio. SVP and Russillo, the podcast.
Hey, what's up? Russillo with Cannell today. Initial reaction, the Aaron Hernandez verdict. Guilty on all counts, life without parole at 25 years old. Do NFL players really know their teammates? We did that with Louis Riddick as well as he hung out. Roger Cossack, his initial reaction, a bit surprised. We had a verdict today. What should we expect from the Spurs? A little NBA talk as they get ready for the Pelicans and their season finale. Steele, reaction from inside the courthouse as she's been there throughout and as the verdict was read today. And we finish up the show.
SVP and Russillo.
No, for real.
Breaking news. Just hours ago, you start your day, you go, okay, what's going to happen? Day 7 of deliberations for the jury in the Aaron Hernandez murder trial. And at the first sign of it, I'm going, is this thing taking longer? Is this going to drag out? Is it going to be a hung jury? Not the case. A verdict comes in after those 7 days. Guilty, first-degree murder, and a bunch of other counts as well. That is life without parole. There will be an appeal. That is part of the process. So Aaron Hernandez, 25 years old, headed to Walpole, which is only miles away from Foxborough.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on the same page. I mean, I was sitting this morning prepping for the show, had a bunch of good ideas, and then all of a sudden you see the breaking news flash across the screen on SportsCenter. And we've been anticipating some sort of announcement, some sort of verdict from the jury. And the longer it went on, you're kind of thinking, man, there must be issues. They're not on the same page. Maybe this is going to work to Aaron Hernandez's favor. And then all of a sudden they come out and guilty. You know, once that verdict's read, it's pretty shocking to hear. First of all, when you're watching it, to see somebody who's going to be sent away for life without parole. But, you know, it's one of those things. It's one of those moments where you're like, this is real. Like, it really real. Like, he's and you see the handcuffs on him and the guards behind him. It's like, this is it.
Roger Cossack, who will join us a little bit later this hour, one of our legal experts, was up with Bob Lee immediately live after the verdict was read, kind of going back and forth, and his first thought was this.
I thought it was going to be a hung jury, and I was surprised when we got the word over in the newsroom that there was a verdict. I said, a verdict or a message? And they said, no, a verdict, and here we are with a conviction in first-degree murder.
Steele, who was in the courtroom when the verdict was announced, is going to join us as well. That'll be next hour because we're kind of all over the place with all this breaking news. But she and I knew her a little bit from her time when she was up here in Bristol. She actually worked with you guys on night, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was asking her, she's really, really bright. If you look at her background, you understand. But I'm like, man, this should be pretty easy, huh? And she goes, well, no murder weapon, no witness, no clear motive, other than those of us that just have the opinion that Hernandez is a sociopath, just out there doing these things to all these people, because he's still awaiting a double murder trial, which now just plea out of that. But I don't know, man. You see some weird stuff happen in the legal system. There's just a couple guys sitting here talking. I'm going, this show's really weird today if he's getting off. Right, because the two of us, I think we would sit here and agree that based on everything, even though it may be circumstantial, kind of points in one direction, man.
Yeah, I think when it came out, the first time we heard of his arrest, we just assumed it was going to be a quick case. You know, it was going to be open and closed because of a lot of things that actually did not play in this case because of his past history, you know, issues he had all the way back to the University of Florida, you know, other things that had happened, other accusations of murder, double homicide. But those, and all of a sudden, I agree with you, all of a sudden there was this shift. Well, maybe he does get off because they didn't have the gun. Maybe his defense can make a case that he wasn't there at the scene. They couldn't do the timeline. Where was he at that time? So there was all of a sudden, and when you think about it, all they need to do is bring that little ounce of doubt in the jury's mind to say, you know what, maybe he didn't do it, but, you know, in the end it comes out, and they saw enough circumstantial evidence to convict.
Just hours ago, the jury read this.
Madam Foreperson, on indictment 2013-983-A, charging the defendant Aaron Hernandez with murder, what say you, Madam Foreperson? Is the defendant not guilty, guilty of murder in the first degree, or guilty of murder in the second degree?
Guilty of murder in the first degree.
He also had looked at, and this is something I noticed the first time I watched it. I checked it again because I started to get worried, but Hernandez was turning to his mother, he was turning to his fiancée, And he said to them, be strong, as he was entering the courtroom. And that was something that people that were in the courtroom saw. When I watched Hernandez on TV, just in the studio getting ready for the show hours ago, Hernandez, after the judge had spoke to the jury about how they're supposed to handle the proceedings now, and then the jury started speaking again, Hernandez, now shackled, so cuffs around his wrists, sitting down next to his defense attorney, looked at the jury, and you could read his lips. You could see it. I saw it twice. He just goes, "You're wrong."
And that was pretty crazy, too. I mean, you think about the way he's carried himself. He's been pretty aloof. He's been pretty, not emotional, hasn't showed any ounce of regret, just kind of kept that, I guess aloof is the nature I would call it, above it. And, supposedly he's talking about video games while the jury's out deliberating.
Yeah, he was
talking about apps with the guards and stuff, and it just seemed random. And to me, it didn't seem like this was even a concern of his that he could get put away. Like he wasn't even worried about it.
And now this is just two guys talking, because when you cover this kind of stuff that's serious, you want to make sure you have all the terminology right. And look, it's 3 hours. I'm going to get something wrong here. But,
I'll get a lot wrong.
But, how would you talk about this if this was one of your buddies? Like if you grew up with Aaron Hernandez, would you go, well, no motive, no gun, no witness? Or would you go, hey, how many times can you be around the same thing? Even though the judge said that the double murder, you can't use that here. And then the guy who he'd shot in the face over a dispute about a bar tab at a strip club. I don't know anybody like this, okay? I have some guys that I grew up with that you go, okay, that guy's not a great guy. But I don't know, we're hearing from some of the athletes. I mean, just a side note, everybody's entitled to their opinion, but if your opinion makes you look like a moron, then we're going to say it. When Brandon Spikes, a linebacker, was a teammate of his at Florida in New England, says the justice system, man. Or how about the Pouncey brothers? Anybody hear from them? They still selling those free Hernandez hats and shirts? Like those guys who every time they open their mouth sound dumber and dumber. And you just, I don't know, man. I don't know how you look at this case and think that something bad happened today, because there's a family on the other side of the prosecution where, who knows who Odin Lloyd really is other than the family. But, I mean, were people going to feel better about the justice system if he was found not guilty today?
Yeah, I don't see any way how you could. And I totally agree with you. I was picturing this because I was trying to think of teammates that I had that had been in legal trouble. And, there have been a lot of them. Never anybody to this extent. But you wonder what the conversation is in locker rooms around the NFL, and specifically the Patriots locker room, the guys that played with him and know him, guys that played with him at Florida. And you wonder what is going through their head. If they're saying, yeah, I could see this was trouble in the making. Or are they thinking there was no weapon in trying to say, hey, there's no way this could happen to this guy. He was a guy that I saw that was, that we had a good time with, that he was just a good-natured guy. I don't see how you can make that from everything you've read about him. You start piecing things together. Now, are we judging him without knowing all the facts? I don't think so, because sometimes you are guilty by association, and some of the mistakes that you've made in your past do cause you to get judged harsher than you should.
With Danny Cannell today, it's SVP and Russillo on ESPN Radio. All of our guests in the Subway Fresh Take Hotline. Again, hit us up on Twitter, 1-800-Flowers.com Twitter feed. It's at SVP and Russillo. And I can seem like I'm assuming a lot, then fine. Because I think a lot of guys agree with what we're talking about. I'm sure there are others that go, nope, this is wrong. Justice was not served today. I don't know how you're around a guy who says, you shot me in the face, you're my buddy, and there's also a double murder you're being investigated for, and you're at the scene where the defense attorney basically just waved the white flag at the end of this in his closing arguments and said, okay, sure, Aaron Hernandez was there. Sorry, we've wasted your time for months on that storyline, but he was there. He may have seen it. He didn't know what to do. He's just a dumb kid. Give him a break.
And the one thing that the jurors repeatedly were asked after the jury when they were able to talk to the media was, did you come in? Did you have any sort of judgments, any prior
that was great.
feelings?
Right.
And they all said, no, we really emphasized to ourselves in the jury room that we were not going to make any preconceived notions. We weren't going to take anything we had heard. They were trying to start with a clean slate and not worry about the past. And I take them at their word. They said they did that. I believe them.
We can sit here and say it's sad for Aaron Hernandez, and
it's a tragic story because a
25-year-old
is sent to jail for life. Nobody wants to see that, but
there's a family on the other side.
Exactly, justice is served. I mean, you see the stories, and Odin Lloyd's mother and cousins and family members talking about him. That's a tragedy even more.
So we're going to speak with Roger Cossack later this hour. We're going to have Michelle Steele, who was in the courtroom out there in Fall River. She's going to join us next hour. So we're going to do a lot on this. But if there's anything new, another part of it, I mean, there's not really going to be any news developments. We know what's happening, but more and more reaction we'll have it. We're going to sprinkle in a little NBA as well. I know on shows like this where it becomes kind of all-consuming and big news stuff, are you guys going to do 3 hours on this? We're going to do a lot on it, but we're also going to sprinkle in some other stuff as well.
SVP and Russillo.
Guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder. That means life without parole. There's an appeal that is immediate based on Massachusetts law, and he also faces another double murder charge, which people that understand it better than Danny and I do say, okay, that's something you're just going to plea out of at this point. So Hernandez is going to go away forever. By the way, I actually went on a field trip in high school to that prison.
Did you really?
Yeah.
What was that like, the Scared Straight?
You know what's weird, though? It's like Walpole's no joke, okay? I mean, it's not a great town. It's as real as it gets as far as jail's concerned. And we went there as a high school field trip, I think I don't know if you call it sociology when you're in high school, but it's essentially the kind of course. And they acted like it was Scared Straight. Now, it was a bunch of kids. It was like 20 of us from Martha's Vineyard, and we roll in there, and like the guy that was in charge of the tour laid into us immediately, like really got into it. And I immediately hated him. I'm going, come on, man. But he was basically trying to prove a point, and at the end of it, he goes, that's how we treat. We have different groups that come in here, and I'm always the same way because I don't want any of you guys to think this is a joke and not take it seriously because something could happen. So he basically scares the hell out of you and gets in your face and tries to intimidate you. And my feeling was like, oh, I'm not a prisoner. I'm here on the tour. But
I wonder if Aaron Hernandez will ever be featured at the NFL Rookie Symposium. I mean, that'd be if he could.
They're not going to ever let him out for something like that.
He could film a video. I mean, imagine how impactful that would be.
Okay, but what if Hernandez is
never
still,
admit? Right, I didn't do it. You're wrong. Right.
Anyway. So if you're friends with Hernandez, and we're going to get into this a little bit later. I know Tom Curran, who I know well from Boston and Stanford Steve, he tweeted out something earlier saying the Patriots should have known more about Hernandez.
Yeah, the effects of him on their roster could have.
Wow. I mean, we knew he had some problems in Florida, but no one ever talked about this. None of us did. None of us knew. And then if you start doing stuff like, well, certain tattoos, that's gang related, that means this or that. You know how you would get crushed in this business today if you just started saying, hey, that's a gang tattoo, okay? But we can all do it after the fact, right?
Right.
But it really becomes this question, Danny, of how well do you know all those guys in your locker room? And if I look at you and playing in different locker rooms around the NFL, I mean, I'm sure you play with some bad dudes, maybe like Aaron Hernandez, but how well do you really know each other?
It's different. I would say in college you know guys pretty well. Like you have a pretty good beat on everybody. It's more you live together, you do more together, you hang out more together, you run in the same circles. Like, and there are some racial divides too. I mean, most of the white guys typically hung out together, and most of the black guys hung out together. You lived in different places, but still, even across the racial divides that were there, you still knew guys pretty well. In the NFL, it gets much different because guys, it's just the different circumstances of life. Like some guys are married. They go home to their families. It's a 9-to-5 job. They come in, they go home, they never hang out with you. Other guys, might be a little bit wild. They might go out more, and you might see them a little bit too. Or they might have friends outside, like guys, because you have money, they can bring in their crew from Bristol or wherever it is from high school. They can have that as their kind of clique that they hang out with, that they like to go out with on the weekends. So I would say you know much less about guys, but there are definitely some guys that I was teammates with when I was like, I would not want to get into it with this dude late at night.
Now, are we talking about just being scared of someone or thinking that guy's always making the wrong decision?
Both. Like the guy would make the wrong
Who are you
decision.
most scared of?
There were a few. I mean, there were a few, but most of them I was really cool with. Like I never had a teammate that I didn't get along with. There were definitely guys though where I was like, man, if it's late at night and I'm out with this guy, if things go down, I might want to run the other way.
Because you would go out. I mean, we know each other. You're a social guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I went all the time, but I was one where I usually try down to hang around with some of the bigger dudes, like some of the offensive linemen, defensive linemen, somebody who's going to have my back if things go down. Because I kind of hide behind them, right? And they usually would. Like everybody kind of, even if you're a backup quarterback, like they just kind of look out for the quarterback.
Offensive linemen are great anyway because they're enormous. They can drink so much, and even if they're drunk, they just seem like they're having a good time. Like they're not really belligerent.
But some of the guys that the decisions that they make, I would just be like, what is going on? Keith Hamilton was one of the most intimidating defensive dudes I've ever been around. Played a Pitt, big dude, scary looking guy. And I remember I was playing for the Giants. We were pulling out of the players' parking lot, and it was pretty recently after the game. Home game, Giants Stadium. We're driving out of the stadium, and it's crowded, because a lot of guys just want to get out of there. I think we had lost. It was a bad game, so let's get out of here. So we're lined up, and we're waiting, and Keith Hamilton's car is behind mine, and I can see what's going on. And some dude, walked in between our cars, and all of a sudden, Hammer was his nickname, he beeped at him or something. And I'm looking in my rearview mirror, and all of a sudden I'm noticing words are being exchanged. So you've got a guy who just finished an NFL game who's probably still a little bit salty, a little bit on edge, and you've got a fan who probably had a little bit too much to drink, or he had no idea that he was mouthing off to one of the baddest defensive tackles in the game. And it's about to go down. Hamilton gets out of his car, and I'm like...
Did you say it was going down for real?
Yeah, it was going down for real. So I had to hop out of my car, and I feel like I saved an incident. It could have been really ugly. And I was like, Hammer, just get back. It's not worth it. Get back in your car. And I'm, screaming at the dude, to just keep walking.
Did he recognize either one of you guys?
I think finally, I hope so. I think I was starting at the time. I was a starter. But I'm like, why are we doing this right here, right now? It really wasn't a good idea. There were other times when brawls would break out in Denver. I was in the Broncos, and it was probably 3 or 4 a.m., just like you saw Cephalosha and those guys. Club had closed, lights come up.
Cowboy Lounge?
People are scattering. No, I don't remember where it was. Somewhere in Lodo.
Yeah, that's my
So
spot.
coming out, and all of a sudden a brawl breaks out. And I was with there was a couple guys on the team that weren't bad guys, and we had no idea who was brawling or why, but they were ready to throw down. And I'm like, are you serious right now? You really would risk your career to mix it up with some white dudes after who are getting in a brawl over some girl at the club.
A bunch of Russillos, right?
Yeah, hotheads who get angry after, at the club. They're ready to mix it up a little bit. And so I'm like, let's just leave. And they wanted to watch. I'm like, no. I'm like, what are you thinking?
So he's still a leader, even though not the starter.
I tried to
in Denver.
Or I was just weak and didn't want to fight.
But it is crazy. It's really easy after the fact to go, how did they not know this? And that's something we should discuss more. How do you look at the NFL? How do you look at the Patriots? But those are always awesome stories.
SVP and Russillo.
Joining us now, though, ESPN legal analyst that was on live immediately after the verdict was reached in the Aaron Hernandez case, guilty of first-degree murder, life without parole. Roger Cossack, our legal analyst. Roger, when you heard that there was an announcement this morning, what were your expectations?
So I'm sitting in the newsroom, getting my stuff together, come in this morning, and then all of a sudden I get told, quick, come on, run over, there's a verdict. And I thought, verdict? Or is there a question? Because it had been, 7 days the jury had been deliberating. We hadn't really heard very much for them. I thought, well, maybe, and frankly, I thought the jury was hung. I thought, after all this amount of time, this is a hung jury, and they're coming in to tell the judge something that, we just can't go any further, or what do we do, but we can't seem to reach a verdict. And then I was told, no, there's a verdict. So that, ended that speculation, and there was.
Now, when you look at the testimony of the fiancé, because we have no motive, we have no weapon, we have no witness.
Right.
But the testimony of the fiancé, how do you think that changed the jurors' ability to make that leap of faith, essentially, on what kind of verdict they come up with?
This was an incredible jury. We saw just a little bit of them afterwards, and we heard what they had to say and what they thought about. And we heard them say about the, presumption of innocence, and we heard them say, and someone asked, well, you didn't have a gun. How did that figure in? You didn't have the murder weapon. And they said, we didn't need the murder weapon. This is circumstantial evidence. There are other things we can use. Yes, I suppose it would have been better if they'd have had a murder weapon, but they didn't. And they worked around it, and they said circumstantial evidence. Now, the fiancé testified. I thought her testimony was just begged belief when she said, I got a call from Aaron, and he said, take this box, take it out in the middle of the night and dump it in a dumpster, and I don't remember where the dumpster is, and I never looked inside the box. I don't know about you guys, but I don't know a woman in the world that wouldn't have looked inside that box. And particularly if she was getting a phone call from me in the middle of the night saying, go out and dump it. So I just thought that begged belief, and I think that the jury didn't buy it. And so, that's kind of circumstantial evidence. Well, okay, you can say, well, she didn't know, and we don't know. But on the other hand, common sense. What do you think? And you think that there's somebody saying get rid of the gun.
What was the most compelling testimony you heard throughout?
Well, again, the prosecution had to fill in the gaps, if you will. They didn't have the weapon. They didn't have a witness. And so they had to fill in the gaps. And in some ways, I think that his fiance's testimony did him in. I just thought it was so highly unbelievable. What did she say? She said two things. She said, one, I took this box that I never looked inside and dumped it in a dumpster that I can't remember where, when we're all talking about what happened to this possible murder weapon. And the other part of it, which was, I went out in the middle of the night, put my baby in the baby seat, and drove in the dark of night to meet one of the co-conspirators, hit an ATM twice to give him $1,000 at Aaron Hernandez's directions. That's hard to explain, and I think that was hard.
What would your strategy be for an appeal?
It's a tough appeal. You're entitled to appeal. The state mandates you get an appeal on a first-degree murder conviction. But if anything, this is one of those cases where defense lawyers had a judge who was, I don't want to say defense-minded. I thought she was pretty fair. But most of the time, she made decisions in pretrial and in motions that were what the defense wanted. A lot of testimony that the prosecution wanted. The text messages that Odin Lloyd was sending in the car never got to the jury because she said, no, these are too prejudicial, and he's entitled to a fair trial, and this may have too much of an impact on the jury. We're going to keep it out. So there's not, you can't just appeal. You can't say, well, I don't like the verdict, I'm going to appeal. Some other court will turn it over. That's not the way it works. There has to be a mistake of law that said you didn't get a fair trial, and that's going to be almost impossible in this case.
Roger Cossack in studio with us here, SVP Russillo with Danny Cannell today. I noticed the defense attorney put his hand on Aaron Hernandez. Is that just part of the routine? Do you have to do that even when your guy is done as a defense attorney?
You're a defense attorney. You're involved in this to some degree. This is how you make your living. I've done it, and I was a prosecutor and defense lawyer. At the end of there comes that moment when your client is being convicted, and you've established, I know it's hard to believe, but you've established a rapport with this guy. You've gone through this trial with him, and now you see it all crumbling. You put your hand on his shoulder. You know what's coming. You know that he's never going to get out of jail. The state has said today that he was just sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. That was the difference. He was charged with two crimes, murder one and murder two. If they'd have found him guilty of murder two, he would have had life with the possibility of parole. Not this time. Murder one, no parole.
You've said, and I think this is maybe the most interesting thing I've heard you say, is that how great this jury was.
Yeah.
Very complimentary towards them.
Yes.
And not being a legal expert, I know whether it's covering these things or just watching movies and TV, when you talk about beyond a reasonable doubt, it feels like at times a system that was initially set up to protect people from false accusation or actually false sentencing here, a lot of times it feels like, well, that's just the game you play. Like, just try to plant a little doubt if it just seems like overwhelmingly common sense tells you this is just a bad dude that was out there doing awful things to people all the time.
And maybe that's true, and the jury got that. But the defense lawyer's job, I get caught with this all the time. How could you have done this? How can you defend a guy like Aaron Hernandez? Well, when you become a lawyer, they make you take the oath, and it's the same oath the prosecutor takes, and it's the same oath I swear to defend and uphold the Constitution. And the Constitution says that we're all entitled to the presumption of innocence, and we're all entitled to a defense, and we're all entitled to a fair trial, and we're all entitled to an impartial jury. And Aaron Hernandez got that today. What do lawyers do? Sometimes it's unpleasant what you have to do, so I'm sure that perhaps defending Aaron Hernandez was not the most pleasant of jobs, but that's what you do. And if you don't have a defense lawyer, and if you don't force the prosecution to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, then you don't have a judicial system. Then you have the government coming in and saying, we accuse this person, he's guilty, take him away. The defense lawyer has to do it. Again, I know that these are unpleasant things to do. You read about somebody who defends the child molester, and you go, oh, my gosh, how can they do such a thing? You got to do it, and that's what defense lawyers do.
Thank you so much for your time, Roger. Awesome.
My pleasure, guys.
Here you go. Roger Cossack joining us here. Subway Fresh Take Hotline. Show's presented by Progressive Insurance, Danny Cannell and Ryan Russillo. It's really easy for me to get emotional about it at times, and you think, okay, the Boston Marathon, the bomber, and somebody has to defend that guy. But Cossack's closing point is the right one, essentially. That's what you're going to have a lot of things you don't like. I don't like seeing Hernandez's defense attorney put his hand on his shoulder, but he has developed that relationship, and without this system, would you rather have the alternative?
Well, and look how many people get off. Like, look how many people that defense attorneys represent, and they get them out. They get them off. So there are times when a guy is not guilty, and they present a case, and they present the facts, and there was a wrongful judgment. So they serve a purpose for sure. I think it'd be a really tough job. Really tough.
Yeah, if I was a defense attorney and you're making all this money and you go, okay, you're going to defend the Boston Marathon bomber. And you go, okay.
Right.
And you sit in a room and go, well, wait a minute, are you sure about this? Like, that's – you're going to be wired a certain way, man.
Yeah.
Geico presents Strange Savings Stories. Astronomers detected an interstellar transmission. It stated, Geico, 15 minutes could save you 15% or more. The implications were staggering. Was the cosmos telling us we could all save hundreds on car insurance with Geico? Or did their radar merely pick up a signal from the nearby Rufus and Clyde's morning show? We may never know.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
SVP and Russillo.
A question that we haven't asked yet when looking at the Hernandez thing, with all of the issues the NFL's had off the field and a lot of people pointing the finger at the NFL, you go, well, wait a minute. Is there anything here with the Aaron Hernandez case? With Danny Cannell, this whole week we have Louis Riddick in studio. Normally, Louis, we're talking about the draft. But with the aftermath of this, guilty on all counts, first-degree murder, life without parole for Aaron Hernandez. You played in the league, too. I mean, it's not like you just worked in the front office. And I was talking with Danny about this earlier. I know you already heard this part of the show a little bit earlier. But, hey, how well do you know these guys? What situations have you been in where you think maybe this guy's more capable of some stuff than I could even think of?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and I'm in lockstep with what Danny said about this. In college, you know, when I went to Pitt, there was really 2 or 3 dorms that all the players lived in. And I was kind of, you know, I'd hang out in some of the other dorms. I kind of knew what guys did. Everybody had the same financial means, pretty much. Pretty much. I don't know how it is at other schools, Danny.
Shots fired.
But everybody kind of just rolled and did the same thing. So you kind of knew. I mean, you knew who the knuckleheads were, who you pretty much had to stay away from if they started to venture, you know, off the grid a little bit. But now when you get to the pros, it very much so is different because you do have some family guys. You have some guys who are single, some guys who are kind of dating, this and that, whatever. But I know in my experience now, it depends who you're hanging out with as to how much you know them. And there are guys, and there's one guy in particular who I can remember when I played for the Falcons, who I hung out with. And one night there were some things that went down, and I said, you know what? I will never hang out around him again, ever. Because I knew that night, I mean, this guy was just a ticking time bomb. And it could have gone either way at any moment based on, you know, when he started drinking and started getting rowdy and stuff. And I was like, you know, in my mind, I always had a governor where I could tell, you know what, okay, it's time to kind of like shut it down here. Pull back, whatever. This situation is getting crazy. I could tell this dude didn't. So it's just, now, I don't know how everyone else on the team was. Now, you know, when you get on like a team plane and you're at a hotel, you can kind of, I was pretty good at mingling with all racial groups, all different kinds of guys. I kind of knew who the guys were who, he's probably a pretty good dude, and knew the guys who were who I said, if something did happen, I wouldn't be shocked. But you never really know. In a situation like this with Aaron Hernandez, I'm sure there are people who go, I'm not shocked, but I can't say I would have saw this coming. This kind of thing.
Yeah, because this is another level.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. I mean, it's almost like I just sat here and just kind of left you hanging like that. Because this is different, man. I mean, this is like,
if all this stuff's true, I mean, we're just talking about a guy who happened to play in the NFL who was also maybe a psychopath.
Yeah,
that's. I mean, you don't want to call people names.
Yeah, I mean, that's it's tough, man, and it's tough. You know, you just gotta.
And if you went strictly off guys' records, their past, trouble they've been in the past, you would eliminate a lot of guys. You wouldn't give a lot of guys an opportunity that can turn their lives around. Because I played with guys, too, that made really dumb decisions, and they paid for it, and they might have gotten cut on one team or, you know, thrown out of one college, gone to a different one, and they made the most of it. So there are good stories for everyone that turns out like this.
It's all about, especially if I switch hats and put on a team building hat, it's all about assessing risk, man. Yeah. And all about, and a lot of it is, even though, you know, if you have everything lined up, all the information lined up that you could possibly get on a guy, you could have 3 different GMs look at it totally differently because they just feel differently about what that guy did and or what their own experiences are and what they think they can handle and how they can help a guy. And that guy may react totally different in all 3 of those situations. One situation, he goes off the grid. Another one, he's so-so. Another one, he turns his life around because he respects you that much. That's why I say this all the time. Ryan, I said this how many times on the show. Guys and how they succeed in the NFL, when you talk about bust rates of players, And you hear people say, well, it's either because the player gets hurt or he just doesn't grasp the system, the game's too fast. It isn't all on just the player, man. When I was my first year I played for the Atlanta Falcons under Jerry Glanville, what I learned there and how I was as a player there as opposed to when I went to Cleveland the next year and played for Nick Saban and Bill Belichick, I knew nothing about football compared to what they taught me. I remember Nick Saban asking me, what are you doing? How are you standing? What are you looking at when the ball snapped? And I was like, that's a good question, man. That's a real good question because apparently not a whole lot that's making you happy. So that's how it really works in the NFL.
It's SVP and Russillo with Danny Cannell today, Louis Riddick in studio. Now, we've talked about this, I believe, once before, so I don't want to sound repetitive, but I think it still applies. When you were part of the front office that brought back Mike Vick, and you said that was Andy Reid and then the owner signing off, pretty much, right?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so you could have had a voice in that room, but that thing was going to go down even if you were opposed to it.
That's right.
Do they at that time feel like we know Mike Vick the person now and he's paid his debt to society, so now we know him, or is that just...
That's just taking a chance and assessing.
Yeah,
again,
did anyone feel they knew him then?
It's gathering all the information you can, and then making a judgment, and assessing what the risk is to you, and how you think you can kind of minimize whatever remaining risk there is based on how the strength of your program, the strength of you as an individual. And Andy's just one of those guys who pretty much engenders respect from his players. Like, I want to do right by you. If you go off the grid with him, given how pretty open-minded he is as far as trying to help players who have made mistakes try and turn their life around. I mean, he's been through that in his personal life with his deceased son. I mean, he understands that people make mistakes. If you still go off the grid with him, you'll go off the grid with anybody. So I think Andy has probably, and every coach is different. Every coach has a much different tolerance, a much different capacity to really help guys like that. And so that's why when he did sign him, everyone in the organization, whether you were opposed to it or not for whatever reason, was kind of like, look, if Big Red wants to do it, he's probably pretty confident he can get it done. And you just kind of rolled with it. It really wasn't – I know I personally didn't sweat it at all. I was like, hey, let's roll.
Because most dudes, too, I think it would be so hard to make that decision because everyone's going to come in there. And it's sort of like the draft now. When you do draft evaluations, I've heard you guys talk about it with Van Pelt. Guys are – and I think you asked a player about it. You are going to say what you think the team wants to hear.
Absolutely.
So the trick is to be able to see through that and say, all right, is this dude for real?
I'll tell you a story. We had a guy in for a top 30 visit. Oh, I want to say about maybe it was 2010, 2011 in Philadelphia. And he had some character issues. We knew he kind of wasn't the most compliant guy in the world. We just wanted to get a feel for him. You know, when he's in the building, top 30 visit for those 24 hours, yes, sir, no, sir, I understand, sir, yes, sir, just trying to change, just grateful for the opportunity, sir, yes, sir. And you're kind of like, after a while, you were like, either he's the biggest con or he gets it. Well, when one of our runners took him to the airport, he said he got on the phone, and it was bleepity bleep, this, that, bleep, bleep, I can't, this plate, bleep, bleep, they didn't feed me. And we got back, and they told us that, we were like, see? That's what you're trying to get at all the time is the authentic individual. That's why top 30 visits, formal visits at the combine. Look, man, I mean,
you don't blame somebody if they had somebody sitting behind somebody on a plane.
No, you know what? No. In many ways, I don't.
Right.
Like I went to a school about 3 or 4 years ago, and when you find out, like hanging out at a campus restaurant, and say you just strike up conversation with a bartender or someone who's serving you food, and they don't really know what you're there for, but you just kind of have the gift of gab, and you just start talking about it. Next thing you know, you're saying, hey, how's the football team doing? Next thing you know, you're like, hey, do many of the guys come in here? Next thing you know, depending upon how the conversation is going, people are telling you who's hanging out with who's making judgments that you might want to know about, and then you go into the school and you're going, that's not what they're telling me there. I mean, that's what it's all about, trying to be a private eye. So, yeah, I don't blame anybody. We never, not that I know, but parked someone at a place at a kid's school for a week and had them go into a bar for a week. But you definitely have to play private eye. I've done it. And I found out information that totally contradicted what I had heard from others who were supposed to be giving you the lowdown. And, look, I understand people want to protect their interests. They want to protect their school, want to protect their recruit. And that's fine. But your job in the NFL is gathering information so you can minimize risk. Because at the end of the day, if someone busts on you for character, they're going to come calling you. They're not going to want to hear you say, well, the liaison told me he was all good. They don't care. because it's on you, especially if that's your area and you're responsible for that guy or you're the GM. It's going to come down on you, so you do what you got to do to find out.
Thanks as always, man. We'll talk draft next time here in studio, right?
You got it.
SVP and Russillo.
We'll go live now. Fall River, the courtroom location of the Aaron Hernandez verdict this morning. Michelle Steele has joined us before. She's been covering this case, going all the way back to the indictment of almost 2 years ago. So, Michelle, when you went into the courtroom this morning, what were you expecting?
You know, many of us were even wondering if there was even going to be a verdict today. You know, obviously this jury took its time. We were expecting maybe 3 to 5 days. They took 7 days, so no pun intended, but the jury was still out, even among the reporters who were covering this, whether or not we would get a verdict. As soon as it was announced, I think the consensus in the courtroom was, you know what, second degree, because there was still criticism over whether the prosecution had really proved its case as far as intent and as far as motive goes, right? I mean, there's no direct witness, there's no weapon, and there was still really no strong motive other than Hernandez was vaguely, you know, kind of angry at Odin Lloyd for something he had done, but nobody really knew what. So when first degree was read, gasps everywhere in the courtroom. Lloyd's family emotional, and Hernandez's fiance collapsed almost immediately.
Michelle, when we first started talking about this case, I'm going, all right, well, what do you think? And you said no weapon, no witness, no motive. It's more complicated than you think. What do you think was the turning point for the jury?
Well, when the jury foreman was asked about whether this was unanimous, and then she said yes, one of the first phrases I heard next, and I believe it was one of the court officers who asked her about it, was extreme atrocity. That is one of the circumstances under which you can be convicted for first-degree murder, and the prosecution spent many days showing that Lloyd, with someone who had conducted the autopsy from the state of Massachusetts, that Lloyd wasn't just shot 6 times. He was shot 2 times, of those 6 times, in the back, which means it wasn't self-defense, and that's what I believe tipped the scales against Hernandez, that this was extreme atrocity. This was not a self-defense move.
What was your overall impression of the jury itself as they got to speak to the media?
Well, the jury wants its privacy. In fact, at one point they sent a note saying that a local news van here was following them apparently out of the parking lot. But they said that Shania, the girlfriend of Odin Lloyd, they said that her testimony was emotional. And this is a jury that was impacted by the testimony of people that knew Odin Lloyd. You know, at the end of the day, this is why we're here. Someone lost their life, and that emotional testimony also seemed to bode well for the prosecution in this case.
Were you surprised at all by Aaron Hernandez's reaction, you know, the lack of emotion and regret?
Yes, I was surprised by that. You know, there were people who covered him in Foxborough who said every time that he walked into the locker room, he had this kind of like, I'm a little bit of a big deal look on his face. And I certainly got a glimmer of that when I saw him walk outside his house in North Attleboro the first day that he was arrested. And I'm telling you right now, he had that same defiant look on his face. Some call it swagger, some call it defiance. You know, they're both interchangeable in this case. And I was a little surprised, honestly, to see it after he'd been convicted of first-degree murder. In fact, when he sat down, and this is right before the sentencing, guys, when he sat down, he almost made like a grunting sound. I mean, this is a guy who looks like he's going to make an appeal, and he's going to appeal after that and appeal after that. So who knows what's going to happen, but for the time being, he's going to Walpole, which is a prison that's about 4 miles away from Gillette.
Michelle Steele covering the Aaron Hernandez verdict today. SVP and Russillo with Danny Cannell on ESPN Radio. I noticed that he was looking back at his mother and his fiance, and I was reading his lips, and I watched it a second time, and he looked at the jury and actually mouthed the words, "You're wrong." Were any of the jurors, did they feel intimidated by him at all, or maybe just his story in general?
Yeah, well, you know, when there was a bomb threat at the courthouse a couple of weeks ago, the judge reacted pretty strongly to that. I think she was concerned about whether or not there was going to – we don't know if the Hernandez case was involved at all, but she was very concerned about these jurors being intimidated. When that news van approached them, she was, again, extremely concerned. She actually ended up banning that producer from the courthouse. But I did notice something today, and that was not one juror looked at him as they walked in. I think that They've come to a decision. They are comfortable with that decision, and they all want to move on with their lives. It's been 10 weeks, 7 days of deliberation. At this point, they've done their duty, and they're done. The last few days, I did see the jury foreman kind of give him like a real long stare, but today, they've moved on.
What impact do you think the Robert Kraft testimony had on this trial?
I think it was huge. I think in terms of star power in this trial, obviously he was absolutely it. And unless you live in Massachusetts, you might not know, but he is an absolutely revered figure around here. And the jurors were the day that he was here, they were leaning forward in their seats. Everybody was absolutely rapt, paying close attention to every word that was coming out of his mouth. And these prosecutors were smart about when they brought him in. You know, it was at the very end. It was like a 1-2 punch. You know, his fiance, Robert Kraft, his ex-best friend, took the stand as well. And all along, the prosecution had been showing this is the timeline. You know, this is where Hernandez was. We have him on surveillance video. His cell phone said this. And when Kraft took the stand and said that he had a conversation with Hernandez where Hernandez told him, gee, boss, can't wait until the timeline for this murder comes out because it'll show I was at the club. Every juror in there knew that was a lie. And I can't help but think that that did impact them in the way that they saw Hernandez after that day.
Michelle, amazing job covering this. Thank you so much for all the work, and get some rest, all right?
You bet, guys. Thanks.
There you go. Michelle Steele, live from Fall River, just outside of the courthouse as she was in there this morning for the verdict. With Danny Cannell, SVP and Russillo. Shows presented by Progressive Insurance. All of our guests, like Michelle, join us on the Subway Fresh Take Hotline.
Do you feel like the media coverage of the Hernandez trial has leaned one way or another? Because when we talk to Wetzel, he's like, it was overwhelming. I never really thought there was any chance he was going to get off. You know, talking to Michelle, it seems like, you know, other than the late deliberations, the fact that it took a while. But to me, it seems like it almost, the last couple months, it had been like starting to turn the other way, like, hey, he might get off. Or do you think that's just their coverage of it?
Well, fair is an interesting way to ask it.
Right.
I don't think Hernandez was ever treated wrongly. I mean, if you're a Hernandez friend or you're a relative, you're going innocent until proven guilty, but that's not my job. I mean, I'm just a talk show host, okay?
Right.
So I can look at all the stuff and go, okay, your best friend shot him in the face, you're investigated for another double murder, and you were at the scene, pretty much proves you're at the scene, and then after his fiance's testimony, which was so implausible that, hey, honey, there's a box, don't look at it, throw it away, try to forget where you threw away a box that probably has a gun in it. And the video of his home surveillance of him running around. So, yeah, like, I'm sorry, but I'm not on the jury. I'm not a judge in this. I'm just a guy, just like you are, looking at all this stuff going, I hope he doesn't get off. So I was.
So you're not in Brandon Spike's camp?
No, I'm not in a rush to prove to everyone my level of intelligence, I guess. I mean, we're talking about Brandon Spikes, who, I mean, just go ahead and Google some of the stuff here. But, like, I get you're a Gator and your teammates with him, the same thing as the Pouncey brothers, but I can't understand how you would sit there and look at this stuff and go, I disagree with the verdict, and let me share it with the world.
His tweet said, I'm confused about the justice system these days, ! Right after the verdict was read.
I've had some guys fire me and be like, okay, you guys, just assume everything. Justice system isn't. Like, you realize a black guy was killed, right?
Right.
Right. So the justice system is, it's such a small group of people, I think, that have shared this, at least with me today, that have said, based on how the way we've talked about the story for the first hour and a half of the show, but it's been a
majority has been a foregone conclusion. We knew this was coming.
His defense said for months he wasn't there. Footprints, DNA, the blunt that was on the scene, and they're like, okay, you know what? You're right, he was there. He's just confused. Give him a break.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's been fair.
Yeah,
Did you have an open mind the whole time or no?
No,
We don't have to have an open mind.
No, I thought he was done. I mean, you start reading all the stuff, you put it together, and it's like, yep, you did it probably.
SVP and Russillo.
No, but not for real.
A little break from the Aaron Hernandez stuff here for a second. We will get back to kind of the newsmakers that we had on the show in the third hour for those that kind of schedule driving around, however you're doing it, so you can get caught up with all of the Hernandez stuff. But tonight's the final night of the NBA regular season. The Spurs are in an interesting spot. They win. They're the 2 seed. They lose. They could be the 6. There's other pieces moving around. Are they in a no-lose situation?
I think they are.
Why? Why is that?
Because Popovich is Pop, and he'll spin it some way. Because I could see if they have trouble early, like if they're struggling in the second quarter, he could just sit everybody and be like, yeah, we were going to rest them anyway. We want to go full speed into the playoffs. He might even rest them from the get-go.
So you think they'll rest tonight, also knowing that New Orleans and
it
their
depends.
battle.
Now, if they get out there and they hop out to a lead and they feel like they have a chance, the problem is you've got New Orleans who's extremely motivated. It's at home. You know there's going to be an electric vibe in the arena. They're going to want to have their, make the playoffs. They control their own destiny. They're going to want it more. So I think if you're Popovich, you could even go out there and feel out the game. Because, sometimes the team might press. They might feel the pressure. They might not play as well. But if they're just getting out-hustled out there, like, yeah, we're just going to rest up.
I don't want to run through all these scenarios because it's really, really boring radio.
To figure out.
But if they win, they're the 2. They're the 3 if they lose, but the Rockets lose at home to Utah. And if the Spurs lose, the Rockets win, and the Grizzlies lose, then the Spurs could be 5. And then they could be 6 if they lose and the Rockets and Grizzlies both win. So we'll just keep it Spurs-specific. But I think that's kind of crazy. Why wouldn't you just want to be the 2?
I think you would. I guarantee it's the only thing the NBA wants them to for all the conspiracy theorists.
I just don't
so they have
the quickest way to end a conversation with me is to start a conspiracy theory about the NBA.
That does it for you.
You're better off insulting my family. I'll at least listen to your point.
You don't give validity to any conspiracy theories? None?
I'm not saying they're impossible, but there's so many that get thrown around with that sport more than any other. Then I always ask. Like I had buddies this time going, "Oh, Duke figures it was fixed."
But here's where Pop goes. If he does it, if he doesn't win, he'd be like, "Yeah, we don't need it." Like he's got an excuse saying we've been there, we're good enough to run through anybody on the road. If they do win, I think he's in a no lose situation. He really is. He could
be the 6th seed. He could sit everyone, be the 6th, and everybody's going to go, Pop's at it again.
Yes, exactly. He's up to his wily old tricks.
That's a joke, though. You want to be the 2. You want to play Dallas in the first round. You want to have home court as much as you possibly could, even though home court has been devalued more and more in the NBA recently in the playoffs.
Unless you trip the air conditioning system.
That's right. That's right.
Respect the game.
So, I don't know, man. You're right. Like, Pop has built up enough equity that he can kind of do whatever he wants. But if I'm San Antonio, I want to win this game tonight. I want to be the 2 seed. I want to play Dallas in the first round, and I want home court in the second round.
Absolutely you do. But I think it doesn't matter. Like, at the end, they'll have an excuse. They'll have a way out of it. So I think they will. Like, I would be really curious because, you talk to Legs, you talk to all these NBA guys.
Respect the game.
It's so much of it is about the mental mind games that you get to get your guys to buy in. That's why I was joking yesterday saying, hey, the Spurs, they've never been back-to-back, so that's it. That's going to be the carrot that he hangs out there at the end of the stick. What does he hang out there tonight? Does he? Or does he say, you know what, guys, we've had an incredible run. No matter what happens, we're fine. What do you do there? You don't want to lose any of that momentum that they've created to get here.
Respect the game.
Do they lose any momentum if they play
I'm
everybody?
not talking about momentum. I'm
you
not
don't
worried
like
about
momentum?
that.
It's such a huge factor.
No. I'm just saying for them, I'm not worried about it. Okay, younger team, unproven. We feel really good heading in. Oh, Memphis, if we're starting the playoffs a month and a half, 2 months ago, you're going, maybe they're playing for a championship. Their momentum, I know it's been the substitutions as far as how they've dealt with some injuries, Conley not playing, Gasol missing some time, and Tony Allen missing a lot of time. But you're just not as afraid of Memphis right now. I hear the Clippers. The Clippers, they could be the 2, and nobody really buys into that. I'm not telling you like I'm the one guy banging the drum for them because I'm not. I picked them to make it to the finals before the season started, but I'm just off that with the way Golden State's played. But the Clippers could end up being the 2, and nobody really feels like it's been that great of a season for them.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Are they the most overlooked team right now? More so than Atlanta in the East. That's a 1 seed. Are they? Because nobody has talked about them at all.
No, right?
Am I right?
No, you're right. You're right. You are, because it's and I don't think it's just the Chris Paul haters that don't want to pay attention to how well he's actually done in the playoffs. But San Antonio, all the love. Portland, the injury stuff with them, I'm just
too much.
I think it's too much. Houston,
they've been talked about a lot because of Harden's MVP race.
They have.
Dwight's back healthy. What are they going to do?
Memphis was the 2 for such a long time. Dallas, I'm off.
Nobody ever talks about Memphis anyway, though. Like
Memphis was talked about more this year than the Clippers have been, though, as a threat coming out of the West. That's not
in the preseason.
I would say once the season got rolling, there's been more love and more fear of the Grizzlies about where they'd be in the playoffs than the Clippers.
Right.
Is that fair?
Yeah. Totally. So you're supporting my fact that the Clippers probably are the most slept-on team in the West.
But I always do this with Van Pelt when we do that. Are people talking about this enough? Or why is no one talking about this? And then I'll say, well, do you want to talk about them more? And should we start picking them? Because you can say that, yes.
It's a two-team race.
Yeah, that's what it's been. What's more unlikely? This one's been thrown around a lot. What would surprise you more? A non-Cleveland Atlanta Eastern Conference Finals or a non-San Antonio Golden State Western Conference Finals?
I would go non-Warriors Spurs in the West. Even though it's more competitive.
That would be more surprising.
Yeah, because I think everybody has narrowed this down to the two teams out of the West, even though that's a way more competitive conference.
Ryan, am I nuts to think the Eastern Conference playoffs are more interesting than the West? Yeah.
How?
I just think there's a lot of dynamics there.
It's a bye for the 1 and 2 seed and kind of the 3 seed. Milwaukee's been a lot of fun.
First round, but I think the conference semifinals would be crazy.
They could be a lot of fun.
I mean, I think those the 3, 4, 5, they can all win, and it wouldn't be a huge shock if those teams won, would it?
What are you talking about? 3, 4, 5. So Chicago,
Toronto, Washington kind of looks a little tapped out.
But here's the thing: who are you picking? Toronto, Washington in the first round?
You got to go Toronto, right?
Both of those teams. At one point early in the year, you're going, here we go.
Come on,
Stand for Steve over here.
My Raptors-Warriors finals pick isn't looking good now.
We the North.
Drake's going to be there in his women Jordans.
He doesn't wear women's.
Is that the ones you wear?
Oh, now it's getting personal. See?
Come on.
Show us so serious the first hour and a half. Does he really wear women's Jordans?
He did last year. There was a picture of him at the Raptors game, and somebody did the research, and they were women's brand Jordans.
Women's sneakers do have better colors, though.
Okay.
Oh, there's the advice from outsider.
Lady Foot Locker over there.
Respect the game.
SVP and Russillo.
You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Closing it out here on SVP and Russillo. Van Pelt on vacation. Cannell here all week. By the way, tomorrow we're going to have Bryce Petty in studio, the Baylor quarterback, getting ready for the draft. He's actually been one of the more fun college athletes that we've interviewed in a while. I would say in the 6 years of this show.
Yeah, he's really sharp.
He's just
funny.
fun, though.
Yeah, he's funny.
Man.
He's quick-witted. He's good.
And unfortunately, I think the college kids get so freaked out about saying the wrong thing or what their coach is going to think, and there's a PR guy kind of looking at them while they're doing the interview, and Bryce showed, I mean, look, he's not the only one, but you just feel like with college kids sometimes it just doesn't go that well because they're worried about showing any personality. So McShay's a maybe. We could bounce McShay for Al Horford, which I'm totally cool with, and then Michael Wilbon. You all right with that?
I'm cool with that. Sounds like a good show. I got two things to say. Am I allowed to do that?
Yeah, go
one's
for it.
One's like kind of a shill for the network.
Ooh, okay.
I watched Draft Academy last night, and I strongly recommend it for anybody who's into the Draft Academy behind the scenes. They follow 6 guys. They follow Jameis Winston, Melvin Gordon, Shane Ray, Devin Smith from Ohio State, and they've got John Crockett from North Dakota State. But it's like beside, they followed him around for 2 months. They had pretty good access, and the guys are all really open about just life in general. So it's pretty refreshing. It's pretty cool. If you're into the draft, I think you would love this show. Got to check it out. And then my other one is today during the show, there was an announcement made from high school 4-star recruit 2016 class. His name is Guarantano. I'm obviously
locked
dialed
in, huh?
in. Jarrett Guarantano.
Guy.
He's going to Tennessee.
Ooh. Okay.
Now, it's not so much that he's going to Tennessee or is committing early. It's the fashion that he did it. And I've seen the signing day antics get even bigger. He did a video with Bleacher Report Studios, and it's a fantastic video. Like, it's really well done. It's like a trailer, like a movie trailer, but it is out of control. Like, we need to tone it down with some of these, right? It's just going to set it up for a harder transition from high school to college.
Because of the movie trailer?
Yes. Have you done anything yet? I mean, seriously.
Why not take advantage of no one knowing whether or not you can do it?
Do
right?
something.
You could show up to campus, fire on shorties, be like, you see my movie trailer? Before you even have to make any plays. It could be August.
You could DM that to everybody.
Right. Late August. Nobody knows if you can play or not.
It's annoying.
Kevin Durant, I was just reading Royce Young, who covers the Thunder for part of our ESPN.com stuff. Good guy. And Durant just started talking about all sorts of stuff. And beware First Take may go with this, who's on your Mount Rushmore of hoops. So it could be a Mount Rushmore Kevin Durant discussion all day on the network. Who do you think Durant went with? I want to ask Stanford Steve. Your 4 guys, his Mount Rushmore of
ever
NBA
or
guys.
current players?
Ever. Going way back to the Cagers.
Are they all still alive?
They are all still alive. That doesn't weed out much.
No. Just to know how, historic.
How many were born in space?
MJ.
Yes.
I think George Gervin's too old for him.
Isn't he a Larry Bird guy?
I wouldn't be surprised if you had is LeBron on there?
Is that what your final answer?
No, that's a guess of mine. There's
I think
4,
I've
right?
heard him say Larry
It's 4.
Bird before.
Larry Bird. We got 2. We got 2 of the 4.
Yeah, I thought I'd heard him say that.
So we got Jordan. We got Bird. You're going with LeBron?
Yeah.
He's not on it.
How about Kobe?
Kobe's on it.
Yeah, I thought Kobe's on it. Over LeBron. I thought they were boys.
3 of 4.
An old school guy?
Kendrick Perkins.
Perkins. He said if there was a gift shop, he would have Perk manage the gift shop near his Mount Rushmore.
Did we say Dr. J?
NBA guys. Dr. J's not on it. Dr. George Gervin. I mean, come on. The 4 guys ever? His greatest guys?
Who are we missing?
Magic. So, there you go. Get
Big
ready.
men always get hosed.
Who's your Mount Rushmore
No,
Florida State players?
No, Wilt.
We'll do that tomorrow.
Let's do that next.
Do it.
So, who's your Mount Rushmore Florida State guys?
All right, you got Bobby Sura. He's a lock.
Yes.
You got Sam Cassell. He's
Did
a
you
lock.
know Sura?
Yeah,
That
we
was
were
your
the same
guy,
time.
right?
Yeah. In fact, I used to find he's actually a really good dude. He was not afraid to shoot from anywhere.
We got to have Bobby Sura on.
That would be
Tales
fun.
from Tallahassee.
You know what kind of bothered me a little bit?
That he was better at hoops than you?
That bothered me too. But he had a sick ride. He had a Corvette in college.
So you
Pretty
like
nice.
lease it or something?
I don't know how he got that thing. We should have him on and ask him.
Must have got a great deal.
The basketball players got hooked up. It was sweet.
Whoa, what's going on right now?
No, like they had good hookups. Like legal. So we got Sam Cassell. We got Bobby Sura. We got Rodney Dobar.
How about Farouk, the wrestler? Nation of Domination? Played football? You know who he is.
No, you're thinking of Ron Simmons.
Yeah, well, that was his name, right? Farouk?
Yeah, but he's not. We're doing basketball only, right?
What about Von Wafer? We're not going to go with Von Wafer?
I think their Mount Rushmore might be capped at 2. Might just be a 2-man.
Okay.
2-man Mount.
What do you got for me?
Who did you hang out with in college? Like, who did you hang? You hung out a little bit with baseball players.
Thank God there's no football team because they would have beat us up all the
Yeah,
time.
your fraternity, right?
Yeah.
Fraternity brothers.
But the thing is it always really one of the same things. Like, we were friends with a lot of the baseball guys. We were friends with some of the basketball guys. And
So you didn't
we were
fight
friends.
with athletes?
No.
Because at Florida State, there were always issues with fraternities and athletes.
No, and I know everybody thinks every lacrosse guy that walks the earth is the worst human being ever, but my roommates were some of the lacrosse guys. And then, the hockey players, once we decided we didn't hate each other and we all had very similar interests, I became really good friends with them. They're just tough to adapt to because I'm 18 and weigh like 170, and I'm coming from an island from high school, and they're like 22 and have been playing pro-level hockey, and they're living in the dorms. So those guys have an entirely different program. So that first year in college is always tough for everybody. But once UVM, it's pretty small. It's almost like a big prep school. The social circle is pretty similar. So there's no real outsiders. The only problem he had was when Norwich Academy would come and get drunk, and then girls from Greenwich, Connecticut wouldn't want to talk to him, so they would beat us up.
Yeah.
That was about the only problems we'd have.
Who's going to win tonight, Heat or Sixers? A lot at stake. Importantly, who's going to lose?
I want to see how far the Sixers will take this.
I do too.
Like fourth quarter, don't pull up on your side of half court.
Could it be as bad as that girls' game that took all the heat, where they both tanked because they didn't want to face the team in the playoffs?
No.
They'll have to at least put on some sort of show.
Yeah, but why? I think the key is who's playing point guard for either team. If it's close late, and all of a sudden they're like, all right, let's get Chris Anderson to kind of run our offense. That's how you tank.
ESPN Radio, bringing you directly to the biggest events in sports.
Center field, well hit, Hunter back, out of here!
From opening day of baseball,
Throw to the plate, safe at the plate!
right through the World Series.
For the third time in 5 seasons, the San Francisco Giants are the champions of the baseball world.
Whether it's LeBron, Chris Paul, or Kevin Durant, when the NBA tips off, ESPN Radio is right there when a champion is crowned.
Have a new world champion. The San Antonio Spurs are the world champions.
And when the magic of bowl season arrives, ESPN Radio is your home for the new college football playoff.
The college football playoff first national champion, the Ohio State Buckeyes.
The biggest events in sports can be found right here on ESPN Radio. Miguel Cabrera leads the Detroit Tigers into Anaheim to face Mike Trout and the Los Angeles Angels. The pregame's at 7 Eastern, followed by first pitch at 8, Sunday on ESPN2 and on ESPN Radio.